The shift didn't announce itself. It crept in when tariffs were linked to Greenland, when an American president refused to rule out force on Allied territory, and when European officials stopped debating trade and started whispering about bases. Nothing dramatic happened on camera. But inside NATO capitals, the assumption that the alliance was untouchable quietly collapsed. Because when sovereignty becomes negotiable and security becomes transactional, alliances don't explode, they hollow out. And Europe is now confronting a question it was never supposed to ask. Not whether the US would defend Europe, but whether Europe still controls the ground it stands on. Officials familiar with the discussions told international media that multiple response options were being examined. None were endorsed, none formalized. Yet the conversations themselves mattered. Analysts following the situation noted that Europe was no longer debating how to calm Washington's rhetoric. It was debating how to respond if that rhetoric hardened into policy. Some of those discussions, as reported across international outlets, explored economic pressure tools in theory, trade countermeasures, regulatory leverage, public procurement restrictions, all hypothetical, all unconfirmed. But as several economists cited in media coverage pointed out, once tariffs are framed as coercion rather than trade policy, the European Union's toolbox expands conceptually, even if leaders are, reluctant to use it. That reluctance is precisely why one idea attracted disproportionate attention despite its improbability. According to analysts quoted in various reports, some media commentary has raised the theoretical notion of restricting United States access to European military bases. Not as policy, not as proposal, as analysis. European officials stressed repeatedly that no government has advanced such a measure, yet its appearance in serious commentary underscored how strained the moment had become. The idea touched a nerve because of how deeply United States military power depends on Europe. The Economist noted that without bases such as Ramstein in Germany or British airfields, American power projection would be significantly impaired. According to the magazine's analysis, United States operations linked to Venezuela, as well as surveillance over Africa, the Middle East, and the Arctic, rely on European infrastructure. Analysts emphasize this was not leverage Europe seeks to wield, only leverage that structurally exists. At the center of the rupture is Greenland. Trump has reiterated that he will not abandon the option of acquiring the territory. According to reports on his remarks, he has called Greenland essential for United States national security and explicitly linked it to his proposed Golden Dome missile defense system. European officials heard those statements as a fundamental shift, not cooperation within NATO, but unilateral framing of Allied territory as an American strategic requirement. Greenland's status is not ambiguous. It is an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. Both Copenhagen and Greenland's government have reiterated that the island is not for sale and that threats or force are unacceptable. Danish officials have maintained this position consistently in discussions with Washington. From Europe's perspective, the issue is not negotiation, it is sovereignty. Think tank assessments quickly followed. Analysts warned that rhetoric about taking Greenland undermines the basic logic of NATO, which rests on respect for Allied sovereignty and collective security through cooperation rather than coercion. Some describe the situation as a pivotal moment for Europe, arguing it could accelerate debates over a more autonomous European defense posture. Economic tools sit alongside those debates. Analysts pointed to the European Union's anti-coercion instrument designed to respond to economic pressure from third countries. According to trade experts, it could theoretically affect public contracts, tenders, and trade in services. It has never been used against the United States. Its mention alone reflected how unusual the current confrontation is. Escalation carries risks in both directions. Analysts examining possible dynamics warned that European countermeasures could invite United States responses, including adjustments to intelligence sharing, Arctic negotiations, or military deployments. These scenarios remain speculative, but they illustrate how quickly a trade dispute tied to Greenland could spill into security architecture. European leaders have already drawn lines. Media reports quote officials describing tariffs and pressure over Greenland as unacceptable. Some analysts argue that aggressive actions regarding the island raise questions about NATO's functioning. Those questions intensified after Trump publicly announced tariffs. According to Reuters, Trump said 10% tariffs on selected European nations would take effect on February 1st and rise to 25% by June 1st unless a deal on Greenland is reached. The countries named were Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the United Kingdom, Finland, and the Netherlands. Analysts stressed that these announcements were made through social media and public statements and are not automatically implemented policy, leaving room for negotiation and reversal. Trump also criticized European discussions about sending personnel to Greenland, calling it a very dangerous game. He framed Greenland as strategically essential rather than optional. Economists examining the tariff threat noted that the 8 named countries represent a large share of transatlantic trade and include some of America's closest allies. Europe's position is, really constrained. Analysts noted that a major confrontation with Washington would likely force higher defense spending, which is difficult for many governments already facing budget pressure. European militaries rely heavily on shared systems and logistics with U.S. forces. Trade tensions could strain budgets while complicating collective defense cooperation at the same time. Trump has not softened his stance. He reiterated that he would not abandon interest in Greenland. When asked whether the United States could acquire it by force, he declined to confirm or deny. "You don't know what I'm going to do," he said, adding that the network asking did not know either. Diplomatic talks have failed to close the gap. According to reports, Denmark's foreign minister said fundamental differences remained after meetings with Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Vice President J.D. Vance. Asked whether he would leave NATO to pursue Greenland objectives, Trump again declined to specify, saying he would not give up options. Trump framed U.S. interest as protective, arguing Greenland is important for American and Danish security. He claimed Denmark could do nothing if Russia or China sought to occupy the island, while the United States could. He referenced Venezuela as evidence of American capability to act and mocked Denmark's military posture, dismissing recent additions as symbolic. Yet Trump also acknowledged Denmark's role alongside the United States in Afghanistan and said he believed something would work out. Reports emphasized the contradiction, reaffirmed NATO cooperation paired with rhetoric that challenges sovereignty. Some claims circulating in media require, a bit of caution. Analysts noted that references to Danish threat assessments involving specific countries are not publicly verified classifications. Intelligence designations require confirmation through official sources. Media descriptions of pressure campaigns or encouragement of independent sentiment on Greenland remain contested. Domestic U.S. support for acquiring Greenland appears limited. A Reuters Ipsos poll showed fewer than 1 in 5 Americans support the idea. A bipartisan congressional delegation reportedly traveled to Copenhagen as a show of support for Denmark, highlighting divisions within American politics over the approach. Analysts warn that aggressive actions toward NATO territory would have serious consequences for alliance commitments. Danish officials echoed that warning, saying such actions would fundamentally alter cooperation. Observers tracking Trump's strategy describe it as evolving through phases: diplomatic overtures, public pressure on Denmark, and attention to Greenland's internal politics. Trump's strategic rationale centers on the Arctic. Climate change is opening new shipping routes and increasing access to resources. Defense analysts agree Greenland offers advantages for Arctic surveillance and missile defense architecture. The Golden Dome proposal has been repeatedly cited in this context, though specifics remain debated. What once sounded unthinkable is now discussed openly in parts of Europe. According to reporting from the German publication Berliner Zeitung, debate in France has shifted. For decades, talk of leaving NATO was fringe. Now, driven by concerns about U.S. policy direction, it has entered broader discourse. That debate is political, not policy. Clémence Guettet, Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, has questioned reliance on a U.S.-dominated alliance, arguing it risks French sovereignty and could draw France into conflicts against its interests. Her party, France Insoumise, has long called for NATO's dissolution and previously pushed for leaving NATO's integrated command. Analysts stress these views do not represent the Macron government. President Emmanuel Macron has not endorsed a NATO exit, but he has consistently promoted European strategic autonomy. In recent remarks, he cautioned against violating Greenland's sovereignty. French MEP Raphael Glucksmann proposed enhanced EU presence in Greenland to demonstrate European commitment. Others favor political and economic responses rather than military escalation. France's participation in Greenland exercises has drawn attention. At Denmark's request, small contingents from European NATO members have joined Arctic security exercises known as Arctic Endurance. French officials describe the deployment as a political signal. It reportedly involved around 15 specialists, not combat troops, underscoring its symbolic nature. Analysts note these deployments demonstrate solidarity without confrontation. Europe has increased funding for Greenland surveillance, with EU assistance supplementing Danish efforts. Officials emphasize defense cooperation, not escalation. The anti-coercion instrument remains unused. European infrastructure leverage remains theoretical. No proposal exists to restrict U.S. bases. Analysts consistently stress Europe's own dependence on American capabilities. What is unfolding goes beyond Greenland. It tests how alliances function when sovereignty and strategic ambition collide. Article 5 remains formally intact, but the public nature of the dispute has exposed internal tensions rarely seen so openly. Outside observers are watching closely. The Greenland dispute has no immediate resolution. Trump has said he will not abandon his interest. European governments have maintained their position while trying to manage the alliance carefully. Denmark continues to insist Greenland is not for sale while reaffirming NATO cooperation. The The gap between current arrangements and Trump's preferences remains the core conflict. With the Arctic's strategic importance only growing, how this moment resolves may shape not just Greenland's future, but how power, sovereignty, and alliance commitments are understood across the Atlantic. As the standoff hardens, European officials are now watching not just Washington's words, but its sequencing. According to diplomats briefed on the process, Trump's approach has created a calendar problem for Europe. Tariffs are announced first, negotiations are left vague, and security implications trail behind without guardrails. Reuters reporting indicates this sequencing is what triggered the urgency in Brussels, because once trade pressure is formally activated, reversing it becomes procedurally harder on both sides of the Atlantic. Denmark has quietly accelerated coordination inside NATO structures rather than outside them, signaling that Copenhagen is deliberately anchoring the Greenland dispute inside alliance mechanisms. Officials involved in Arctic endurance have emphasized that the exercise's timing is defensive, not reactive, even as Trump frames European involvement as provocation. That divergence in interpretation is now one of the central fractures in the relationship. Security analysts note that Trump's repeated references to Russia and China are doing double duty. Publicly, they justify United States' interest in Greenland. Privately, they shift the burden of proof onto Denmark, implying that failure to acquiesce could expose the island to outside powers. European officials reject that framing, arguing that NATO presence already exists and that sovereignty cannot be conditional on threat inflation. Meetings with Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Vice President J.D. Vance clarified little. According to accounts of the discussions, Danish representatives left with confirmation that Washington sees Greenland as unfinished business rather than a closed question. That perception is now driving European political reactions well beyond Copenhagen. In Paris, the tone has sharpened. Berliner Zeitung reporting shows that debates once confined to academic circles are now being voiced by sitting political figures. Clémence Guettet of France Insoumise has openly questioned whether a United States-dominated NATO can still serve French interests if alliance norms are selectively applied. While President Emmanuel Macron has not endorsed such positions, his long-standing push for European strategic autonomy now carries new weight in the context of Greenland. Raphael Glucksmann's proposal for enhanced European Union presence on the island reflects this shift toward political signaling rather than military escalation. Analysts say these moves are designed to demonstrate cohesion without triggering the very confrontation Europe seeks to avoid. Across the Atlantic, Trump continues to blend coercion with reassurance. He cites Venezuela to underscore American capacity to act, mocks Danish capabilities, then reiterates friendship and alliance history. That oscillation is now the defining feature of the crisis. Article 5 remains intact on paper, but as European officials privately acknowledge, alliances are not only legal documents, they are habits of restraint. And those habits are being tested in real time over an island that is not for sale and an alliance no longer taking its permanence for granted.